Good. All right. G'day and welcome back to another episode of Ideas Digest, the live podcast practice where we explore the ideas that divide us in order to find the humanity that I believe connects us. My name's Konrad, and if you're new to the show, welcome. You're very welcome. Old friends of the show, obviously, you're welcome. I have heard, people have been talking, I've heard that this podcast has been described as an empathy gym. Oh, interesting. Really, Konrad? Who said that? I don't know. Don't you worry about that. But I thought, geez, that's an interesting way to put it. An empathy gym. And like most gyms, I think it's actually a lot of hard work. It's not easy, but come summer, you'll be jacked. Or maybe not jacked, you'll be open-minded and more empathetic. So, sounds like an oversell. I know. It sounds like I'm on Danos Direct late night TV selling some kind of empathy gym. Sounds like an oversell, but honestly, listening to people you disagree with or ideas you might not have considered changes how you see people. And if you're up for that, let's get into it. Welcome, new friend of the show, Melinda Tankard Reist. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Konrad. Thanks for having me.
It's great to meet you. Now, we've tried to line this up quite a few times and things didn't quite work, but we've managed to pull it off today.
Well, you had some crazy excuse about a tree falling on your roof or something like that. I mean, that's a new one that I've heard, but well done.
Yes, don't follow that up. Storms in Melbourne. I'm not seeing any, Konrad. No, I swear. So we've lined this up. You're in lockdown. I'm in lockdown. But as I've just learnt, you're in Canberra. Now, Canberra, I've been to a few times. And there's a burger establishment that I don't mind there, Broad Burger, free plug for Broad Burger. If you've ever frequented Broad Burger, let's say we fortuitously run into each other outside of a Broad Burger and first time meeting each other. And the general questions are, when you meet someone, well, who are you and what do you do? Melinda, who are you and what do you do?
Well, it depends if I feel like telling you or not. So sometimes I
look like a friendly, approachable guy. You're like, yeah, I'm really vibing this guy.
Well, often they look all right, don't they? But you don't always know. So it depends. It really depends who the person is, and it really depends on the kind of mood I'm in. Sometimes I don't feel like talking about porn and sexual violence and horror and torture and rape and sadism and the status of women around the world. Sometimes I just think I don't want to go there with that person. So sometimes I might say I work in women's health.
Ah, okay. The general women's health, and then if they press you and you're in a good mood.
It really does depend, because I'm not always up for an argument, and I have got into arguments with, for example, racist, sexist taxi drivers, and I kind of learned a lesson there once, where I was about to speak at a major event, and this guy really destabilized me in particularly his anti-Semitic attitudes and anti-women attitudes. So I just have to weigh it up, how am I feeling? What kind of mood am I in? What's this person? How might this person respond? Oops, there goes Instagram Live. See, I'm getting worked up and knocking things over already, and we've only been going 30 seconds.
Because you're describing something very, what is it? It's very controversial, it sounds like. And when you're entering a space with a conversation with somebody, say we've just met, you don't know what you're saying. Your work is a highly emotively charged topic that when it's brought up in the topic of you generally introducing yourself, it can start something that you might not be ready for.
That's correct. Or maybe I need to preserve my energy. Maybe I've got a big event coming up. Maybe I'm in the middle of a global campaign that's just taking off and needs my focus. Maybe I'm about to do a media interview that I know I've got to devote all of my emotional resources to. So yeah, it's a matter of weighing it up. Sometimes I'm happy to have the conversation, but there's always a risk in going there, and particularly if I'm talking to men, because we know that most of them will be consuming the content that I'm fighting. Most of them will have some involvement there. That's just the fact. And I just don't need to sometimes hear their justifications, their excuses for why they choose to masturbate to images of women and often girls. So it's always a risk to go there because it chips away at your soul when you hear some men describing why they do it, why they enjoy it, why they know the women really enjoy it, how they seem to look like they're enjoying it. They're moaning with pleasure. And, this is really what men do and what men need. And sometimes I'm just not up to hearing those justifications and the lack of empathy for the women whose degradation they are actually jerking off to. I just sometimes just not in the mood for that.
Yeah. So describe for me the the specific nature of your work. So you're talking about working against a lot of the porn industries and having these conversations. What is the nature of your work around this topic? What does that look like day to day?
I'm a journalist by background. I've written, I think it's 6 books now. I started to focus on this subject when my 3rd book came out, called Getting Real: Challenging the Sexualization of Girls. And that book brought together global authorities in the field of objectification of women, sexualization of girls, looking at the harms to girls specifically from a pornified world, how girls were being reduced to the sum of their sexual parts, how it was all about their bodies, not their gifts, talents, abilities, their spirituality or their desire to make a difference in the world, their art, their poetry. It was all about their sexual appeal, their ability to provide sexual gratification. And the work took off from that book. One of the contributors said, "Your book is a collective shout against the pornification of culture." And that had such an effect on me, those words, collective shout, that I just thought, I need an excuse to start a movement using those words. So I did. That was a decade ago now. And then my book on pornography came out, Big Porn Inc., exposing the harms of the global porn industry. And that book led to even more work in this space. So the work involves really calling out an industry that is built on the exploitation of women and girls, trading in their bodies, selling their bodies, selling degradation, really, sexual exploitation being harnessed for profit on a mega scale by big mega industries, the porn industry, multiple platforms that industry operates from. So it's really about, I suppose, saying, look, this is what's going on. Here are the impacts, particularly on young people whose sexual templates are still forming. Here's how it's affecting our boys. Here's how it's affecting girls. Here's how it is eroding empathy and true intimacy and mutuality, and giving boys distorted and harmful ideas about women and girls, and teaching girls that they are merely porn fantasy props for men and boys. That is their sole value. And we're seeing the impacts of this giant experiment. We're seeing the impacts of the world's biggest department of education on our young people. So that's what it involves. It involves daily campaigns with collective shout and building this movement against the sexploitation industry.
Mm-hmm. In this, like hearing you describe your work to, let's say, somebody you've just met, what if it turns out that I'm the worst kind of guy you've just met? You've just introduced yourself. You're like, oh, Konrad, he seems like a nice, friendly guy. But then I turn out to be one of these people that has judgments about you. I've heard what you've just said, Melinda, and I'm a pretty bad guy because I've judged you. But I'm slightly better than most bad guys. Is this
becoming true confessions, Konrad, or is this like a hypothetical?
It's a bit of both, right?
Okay.
I operate as a proxy for people who might be listening, and they might have formed judgments. But
Right.
in this, we want to put these judgments that maybe you get, and we'll discuss whether I'm hitting some or not, after. But I'd like to confess some of these judgments that maybe myself, maybe some listeners of the show.
You're confessing on behalf of a friend, right?
Yeah. Let's say it's my friend. Yeah.
My friend.
A friend. Yes.
Loves pornography and says it's great for him. Yep.
I've just met you, and so if I confess these assumptions to you, can you correct me where I'm wrong in a very strong, like, yes or no, if that's possible?
So...
And then we'll come to the nuance after.
Okay, so you just want to do yes or no answers.
And then you can put a star next to it, and then at the end, we'll come back to it, and you can expand on it as long as you like.
Yeah, right.
Yeah? How's that sound?
Sure.
I'll start with a slow pitch. I like to ease people into this one. Canberra. You're a lycra-wearing cyclist.
I do. Well, yes or no? Yes. 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 I'll say yes if that saves your time. I'll say yes. Go on.
The purpose is to really squeeze people in and show how these boxes don't quite fit. So I'm glad you're squirming in discomfort there, because judgments do place us in those positions. All right, slightly harder one. You sound like you're in Canberra. You got to be one of these greeny lefty activists.
My first issue that I ever cared about was actually the environment. So I don't mind being described that way. I think we should care for the environment. I am an activist, so that is true, yes. Am I left? Well, that's interesting, because sometimes I get called a radical leftist, and sometimes I get called a right-wing nut job, and sometimes I get called everything else in between. I've been pretty much called everything.
What do you think?
Take me as you find me. Assess my work on its merits. Assess my arguments.
Yes to the activist and no to the lefty. You'd be like, no,
I don't mind.
Quite fit.
I don't mind. I've been called far worse. Left doesn't bother me at all. Left is actually kind of soft compared to other terms I get called. I don't mind. I'm happy to muddy the waters. I don't mind if people can't quite box me in, because I'd rather people think through my arguments and my reasoning, and that I'm, make my case. Often I find the labeling is lazy, because it's more convenient to label me than to actually assess my arguments on their merits. So, I don't really care, because I have literally, I can tell you, been called everything that it is possible to be called. So whatever. I can't give you a yes or no on that one either.
I'll have a couple more and see where you sit. And I know you've probably got them before, hearing what you're talking about. They might even say you're a conservative. So we've accused the left, but then you've just alluded to you must be a conservative, like anti-sex Christian.
Yeah, hate sex. Should be banned. I'm starting it. You've given me an idea. I've started a petition. Yeah, ban it.
Okay.
So it's interesting about the conservative label, because I've had conservatives call me a radical feminist. So, whatever.
You've just preempted my next one.
Sorry.
Are you, Melinda, an angry feminist?
I think anger is justifiable. I really do. And again, this is a label designed to shut us up. And we get told to shut up all the time. But how do you shut up about the global epidemic of violence against women, rape, torture, trafficking, the denial of education, the denial of food, female genital mutilation, female infanticide, female feticide, bride burning, dowry deaths, what's going on in Afghanistan right now, 10-year-old girls being pulled out of their family homes and married, sold into sexual slavery to Taliban fighters. Yes, actually, I'll own it. I get angry most days. Part of the problem we have, one of the big problems we have, is we haven't been angry enough. We have not been angry enough about the state of the world, the state of women and girls on a global scale. Yes, there is a war against women. Yes, I'm angry about that. And yes, I do call myself a feminist. And yes, why not? We should be angry. And I'd rather be called angry than labeled weak or a wimp or gutless, or that I hadn't tried to do something to change the status of women and girls around the world. So yes, I will say yes. Happy to say yes on that one.
And last one, it might follow on from the one before. You must then hate all men. Every man.
Oh my
hate
God,
'em.
you've broken into my phone. You got into my encrypted apps.
Oh, really? Am I hitting them, Melinda? Is this what you get? So that's what you get? Yes?
Oh, are you kidding? Only
Okay, give me
every
another
day.
one. You're trying to get women ahead at the expense of men.
I mean, I don't even know how I made an exception to talk to you, mate. Seriously, you look like a male. No, of course we don't. We have men working with us. We actually even let them in. We brought a young man onto our team, Daniel, who's been coming into schools with me to work with young men. You know, we're all in this mess together. We want to help men be their better selves. We want men to see that they should be invested in this issue as well, that they're being harmed by toxic stereotypes about masculinity. They're being harmed by pornographic scripts which teach them that aggression and sex are essentially the same thing. We want men and boys to see that they are not going to have authentic, intimate, mutually enjoyable, pleasurable relationships with women if they are consuming to pornography, if they are ejaculating to images of extreme torture and degradation and violation of women. That is going to harm their ability to see women as whole human beings worthy of respect, that women are human. You know, we're having this whole discussion about consent, very important, but consent cannot compete with the world's biggest department of education, which teaches boys that lack of consent, violation of consent, non-consent is actually erotic and sexy, and you should get off on that. The best consent program in the world cannot compete with that indoctrination, that propaganda of pornography, which even small boys are now imbibing, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. And the stories that we are being told are getting worse. So to go back to your original question, no, we certainly don't hate men. We grieve at the behavior of so many, and it causes us huge distress every day. You know, the stories that I get from women and girls, I'm saying every day of my life, cause me great despair and heartache and soul damage. But we still hold out hope that men can be better. And that's why we're actually doing more work with men and boys than ever before.
Can you describe to me? You've painted this picture of this, as you put it, what was it? Ministry of Education, the porn industry. If you look at all these moving parts of this massive topic of porn, sex, commodification, sexualization, and men's behavior, domestic violence, all of these things that seem to be interconnected. You've mentioned parts of each one as you've described some of the answers to the questions to the judgments I've thrown at you. What would you describe if you were to drill down into the heart of this problem? What is the heart of the problem that you campaign against in Collective Shout? Is it the porn industry? Is it commodification? What do you think's at the center that maybe you start from and work out from?
It's all of the above. Attitudes shape behaviors. So we are confronting toxic attitudes which contribute to harmful behaviors, particularly towards women and girls. So we're challenging harmful stereotypes about women and about men. We're challenging harmful ideas about sexuality and relationships. We're tackling the whole body image issue, which makes girls feel they're only valuable if they get thousands of likes on Instagram for their sexualized pictures. We're challenging the global porn industry, obviously, the sex industry, the trade in women's bodies, trafficking, modern day slavery. We're also fighting child sexual exploitation, including live distant child abuse of children being commissioned for sexual acts to be abused live on camera, live streamed to men, including Australian men. So again, I can't give you a simple answer. All of these things intersect. So the sexualization of girls in media, advertising, pop culture, music, fashion, and then right through to the porn industry, global sex industry, violence against women. all of these things occur on a continuum. So that's why we address all of them. You can't address one without the other, because they're all contributing to the stunting of an entire generation, and real harms to real women and girls whose lived experience is this every day. Like, the girls I speak to think that it's normal to be sexually harassed. It's normal to be touched and groped at school. It's normal to have boys sending dick pics to them, even underage girls. It's normal to have boys demanding sex acts. It's normal to have boys taking photos up their skirts, down their blouses. It's normal for boys to make sexual grunting and groaning and moaning noises in their classrooms as the girl enters the class. And when we talk about it, the lights go on. The girls realize, well, actually, that shouldn't be normal. We shouldn't have to put up with it. And then they want to do something about it. So we're seeing that the girls are recognizing that they shouldn't have to put up with these hostile attitudes and hostile behaviors. What we help them to see is that a sexist culture grooms sexist boys, and we're not going to change the behavior of boys unless we unpack, critique, dissect the...
I guess as I drill down, you're describing this probably heartbreaking, any parent out there, scary world where their daughters are in classrooms with a normalized culture of sexual abuse, inappropriate sexual advancement, harassment, and you're describing like this pervasive culture that boys and men are caught up within and operate within. I suppose my question is you said this behavior that you're describing is normal behavior. Why is this normal behavior? Where does it come from? Is it inherent? People might hear you and go, oh, is it men? Are men the problem? Are men inherently just sexually violent creatures? Or is it something else? Where is it coming from?
No, I do not believe for a moment that this is inherent. I believe it is taught. And every adult in the room right now needs to own this, because we have allowed it. We have allowed a never before seen experiment on the healthy sexual development of our children and young people. It's our fault. It is not our kids' fault. No, I do not believe boys are innately like this, but I've seen it so often where the innate softness, the innate empathy, the innate kindness in our boys is driven out of them. It is knocked out of them at the earliest of ages, and they are made more tolerant of violence. They are desensitized to sexual cruelty towards girls. This is an absolute heartbreak that in this culture, empathy is devalued. So I really need to emphasize here, neither myself nor my team at Collective Shout think that boys are naturally like this, and many of us have sons, so we don't think that. But we see that we can't compete with a toxic culture that trains our boys in brutal, calloused versions of masculinity. So we are trying to change that. And as many men and boys who want to join us, you are very welcome. And we are so grateful to have more boys saying to us, I don't want to be that kind of man. I want to integrate empathy into my sexuality. I want to be caring towards girls. I want to be friends with girls. They say to us, what can we do to change this? How can we reject these toxic scripts about what it is to be a male? And I've been encouraged to work with more groups globally who are helping men and boys to dissect and critique how this sexed up, pornified culture is harmful to them, how it is corrosive to connection. It's emotionally disconnecting them from other people. It's teaching them that violence and aggressive and even sexual assault is sexy. And this is why we can't address the global pandemic of violence against women unless we address the very drivers of that violence, which includes, of course, the porn industry as a global driver of that of that violence.
I mean, as you describe this, the porn industry, what role does the porn industry play, and industry in general, commercialization of any industry, advertising in general, what role does that play in creating the culture that you describe?
Well, it embeds new codes of conduct in men and boys. It links violence and brutality and aggression with their sexuality. I have now young women saying to me things like, he wanted to ejaculate on my face after our first date. He wanted to tie me up. He wanted to choke me. I have high school girls saying to me, he went for my throat without even asking. This is what it does. I can't give you any better examples than what young women, not just young women, so many women tell me about what men expect from them. They expect them to adopt pornified roles and behaviors. They expect them to act like porn stars. They expect them to want to be choked, tied up, bound, hurt, bruised. I mean, we now have young girls posting their bruised bodies on TikTok saying, this is how I look after sex with my boyfriend. And thousands of children watch these videos of girls parading their bruises. Really, is this what we want for our young people? Is this what sexuality should look like? I've heard a young man say, I don't respond to skin on skin contact. He said, real women and girls can't actually do for me what an inanimate square screen does for me. That the pleasure that he can get from, an unending harem, if you like, of pornified women. So that's a few examples of what porn is doing in conditioning boys to want something, hyperactivating the appetite system so that real women and girls, just cannot compete with that. And why should they have to? What's appealing about that? Girls are increasingly resisting relationships with men because what's on offer is disgusting to them. They don't want that, and who can blame them? And then they think there's something wrong with them, or that they're hung up because they don't want to be, choked and ejaculated on their faces, and they're made to feel, oh, well, maybe they're not free and empowered and liberated. Empowerment is used to compel girls to do things they actually really don't want to do, and to violate their own sense of autonomy and bodily integrity and their sense of self-worth and dignity and respect, because this global commodified, commercialized, industrialized plastic industry tells them, well, you should love this.
Mm-hmm. You're describing a product, the product of porn being sold, and the byproduct of that product being sold and consumed having a rewiring on the very sexual nature or sexual expression or the culture of intimacy that society currently has. So it's almost as if if people look at McDonald's and go, there's an obesity pandemic from this food that's been hardwired to bypass certain parts of our brain, so we eat something with lots of calories and no nutrition, and in the end, here's the byproduct is skyrocketing heart disease. Sounds like you're describing a similar picture for this product called porn, but also potentially co-opted by every product because it can sell, and then the byproduct is shifting the culture of sex to the point where the outcomes are psychologically and physically damaging to young people, both women and men. Does that sound about right of what the picture you've painted?
I can give you a yes answer to that one, Konrad, yes. To give you an example, I had this young woman say to me that she, on a dating app, she listed as a fetish wanting to make love slowly and stare into someone's eyes. Make love slowly and look into someone's eyes. She had to put it as a fetish because she said, if I don't list this as a fetish, I won't get any interest. So she had to list it as something kind of way out there, right? Crazy idea. I want to make love slowly and stare into someone's eyes. I think that's a really great example, because we have normalized these callous and brutalized and uh, very unsensual scripts about sexuality, sex, making love. I mean, you really hear that expression, do you? It's really about getting off and what's going to get you off fast. And more girls are just saying this. There's nothing attractive in this at all for them, and there's nothing loving, caring, empathetic about the whole encounter. So yes, what you say is a correct summation.
Yeah, you're describing porn as product and then sex as product and something to be consumed. And it strips out the relationality of that, because that girl in that weird kinky fetish she has to be intimate with somebody slowly and intimately, it's all of that's been stripped. And so it almost sounds like you're describing this commodification of a very important part of human and social connection.
Absolutely. Robert Jensen, whose work I admire very much, he wrote a book called The End of Patriarchy, and he also wrote a book called Getting Off, about the porn industry and men. And he said, porn is what the end of the world looks like. And it may sound a bit over the top, but gosh, there are days it does feel like you're at ground zero. And every day I think I can't hear something worse than I heard last week, and I do, because of these new codes that we've embedded. This has become their behavioral template now, a behavioral template sold by a mega industry whose business model is to build new consumers. Their business model is they have to get this next generation consuming pornography. That's their business model. It's deliberate, it's predatory, it's a predatory industry that grooms boys to behave in these ways. And that's why we need boys to see that, to see how they're just pawns in a global industry, and they will suffer as well. We're seeing the sexual stunting of an entire generation because of this commodification of sexuality, this industrialized version of sexuality for profit.
Mm. Mm. And that sounds like now it sounds like you're critiquing the very backbone of our Western capitalist system, and this is just kind of one product. I wonder then, maybe the obvious question: why do people consume porn, given perhaps like the packet of charred lungs on an Australian cigarette packet goes, yeah, I know it causes lung cancer. Yeah, I know Macca's is unhealthy, but I'm going to do it anyway. Is this an active choice that you're describing, or is it more like an industry that is as predatory in nature as perhaps the gambling industry that preys on people who already have gambling addictions, or the fast food industry that genetically genetically modifies food so that it actually becomes very difficult for us to use our cognitive reasoning faculties and go, oh no, I know Mac is unhealthy, but then an hour later I'm there consuming this food that I know is bad for me. So I suppose, why do people consume porn? Hearing what you've said, it makes sense. Why does it continue?
Well, because it hyperactivates the appetite system, because it actually rewires the neural pathways. So now, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking away from the moral agency of men who consume porn. I'm not. And whenever I speak to men, I say, you are consumers of a global industry which is trading on the bodies of women and girls. You've become a patron of an industry which actually sells women to make this content that you are consuming. There's no equivalent, dolphin friendly version of this. You cannot tell me you do not know the background of that woman whose degradation that you are masturbating to right now. So please, I just want to make clear, I'm not taking away from moral agency. However, when we are talking about boys who are adolescents, their sexuality is developing and they are consuming porn, often all night, talk to boys about this, and they're on looking at it for hours and hours and hours, even really young boys. You are rewiring their neural pathways. The pleasure is so great. It's been compared to the power of drugs. The pleasure is so great that it is very difficult to compete with that. And they're not at an age where they can rationally critique the arguments and, the how do we compete with that? If a boy's entire pleasure centers, if his brain is being rewired, and deriving huge pleasure from this, and also trying to deal with loneliness, trying to deal with being cut off from other sources of enjoyment and life-giving activities, as we are seeing with multiple lockdowns. If he might be socially awkward or doesn't know how to relate to girls, the porn industry comes in and offers this answer and this solution, which will wreck him. If I could recommend this remarkable piece written by a colleague, James Evans from the UK. He wrote this extraordinary piece, which we published at Collective Shout, on why we need to de-radicalise boys from porn. And he was first exposed around 9 or 10 years of age and didn't get free of it until the age of 34. And that was with a lot of work. And he said what persuaded him, the biggest motivating factor from him was the trauma of his partner, the trauma of his wife, but also he realized that he'd become a patron of the global trafficking industry, that with every download, every click, every view, he was driving an unethical industry. And that really preyed on his conscience and helped him to stop consuming pornography. So it's all you've described. It's the predatory nature of the industry, targeting young men, rewiring their brains, and really setting them up for failure. I mean, if you look at the wasted lives, the hours spent consuming porn that could be put into other things. Also, something that's been plaguing me lately is that these boys who are consuming porn at such high levels, and as we know, the trajectory is towards more and more violent content because they need more extreme content to get the same effect because they become inured to the stuff they started out with. These are the boys who will become the men who become our lawmakers, our judges, our police force, our heads of industry, our sports coaches, and God help us, our politicians, right? So, basically, we're screwed, pardon the pun, if we don't actually do something about this.
Why not take away? Because like you said before, you're not taking away from someone's moral agency. But then the picture you paint straight afterwards is this, from a young age, this brain hardwiring, being programmed to like these things, being drawn to more extreme behavior, growing up with this normalization of this type of behavior, to the point where, I guess my question is, it sounds to me like years of being exposed to this in various different settings, years of fighting an industry with now a phone that has dopamine loops that can push to you content that you might wish to stay away from for the profit motive that the industry has. It sounds to me like all those factors together, do they not almost completely erode the moral agency to the point where someone might, if they were honest, say, Melinda, I agree with you, I can't. It keeps getting me. Is that a cop-out?
Well, I'll say two things. One is that I have compassion for the boys whose adolescents, who are still adolescents, and who are caught in this. I confess I have less compassion for grown adult men who, when shown the evidence, still choose to get off on women being bound, gagged, raped, who still choose to consume a genre, God help us, called death porn, who still choose to get off on racialized violence against women, which is a popular genre of porn. For example, I don't know how graphic you want me to get. It's almost too much to even talk about. But some of the content involving women of color, the content involving, for example, Jewish women and Black women in slavery narratives, Jewish women in concentration camps, all of that is porn, right? I confess I struggle to have any compassion there. If a man said, I get off on, which is also a genre, the torture of animals, like, I'm sorry, dude, but you're testing out my empathy levels here, right? If you're confronted with all the evidence, which is solid now, on the links between porn and violence against women, porn and the development of misogyny, and you still choose to ejaculate to that, and if you're doing nothing to change it, like, I meet so many women whose partners refuse to change. You can leave now. Like, see you later. You're consuming porn in the family home. Your children are in the home. You're treating your wife like dirt. Why is she obliged to stick around and be told, as she often is by sex therapists, that this is just what men do. You need to loosen up. You need to get that moralizing monkey off your back. You need to get drunk and just relax and chill out and buy some sexy lingerie and get some whips and handcuffs and read 50 Shades of Grey. And you just need to loosen up a bit and enjoy it, because that's what women get told. Sorry, my empathy reserves are very limited at that point, I confess. But the men who recognize it, who want to change, who say, help me, what can I do, who make themselves accountable, who do everything possible, including men I've talked to who have thrown the computer out the window, destroyed their mobile phones, right? Then I know they're serious. We can work with those men. Those men have shown they still have a conscience, they still have an ethical center, and we can work with those men. But the men who continue to justify it, who say this is just boys being boys, no, I do really struggle there, to be honest with you, Konrad.
Because the very real impacts that you're talking about, which ultimately at one of its worst points is the violence against women, and you're drawing these very strong connective lines from young boys, an industry that makes money off this, to attitudes towards women, to then how we treat women, see women, perceive and interact with women, to the point where Australia has and probably America too, and different countries have a massive violence against women problem that I suppose that's why you kind of touch on all these different areas. They're all interlinked. And that's kind of why I'm following the maze a little bit back to go, well, where is it coming from? And it seems to be coming from a profit-driven industry that operates as the heart of our economic system, which is just, this is how you make profit. And the system itself, especially if we go to the consumer capital model, we go, well, people consume what they want. The companies are obliged to give them what they want to get money, and that's okay. But then it also sounds like in some industries that governments step in and regulate, like alcohol, like gambling, like smoking, there is almost this admission that people might not be able to control themselves. Like with gambling, for instance, if companies have gotten in trouble for targeting problem gamblers with advertising, and so there's almost this admission. The subtext of capitalism says, well, I can make my choices, and whatever I choose is okay. But then there's an admission within industry that isn't actually said, that says, well, actually, some people might not be able to choose, so keep that ad away from them. Because if you keep those ads away from them, they're less likely to do it. But if we expose some people to those things, it's almost as if we admit that free will in the consumer capital construct doesn't always operate as we think it does.
Yes, what you're talking about here is so important, because we're looking at the colonization of the entire planet by the porn industry, but we're also trying to protect the social compact, social bonds, social connections. We also need to protect the most vulnerable, which are children. So why have we allowed the vested interests of this mega sexual exploitative industry to come before the well-being of the community as a whole. And that's why we have been calling for, at minimum, age verification, a proof of age system, so that children at least can have one obstacle put in the way from them with one click of a key seeing rape, incest, torture, bestiality, sadism, porn. Like, can't we as a community find common ground here and say, yeah, nah, that's going too far. Our kids shouldn't have to see this stuff. And that's why we've been supporting an age verification system. We lobbied for it. There was a federal inquiry into it 18 or so months ago. That committee determined that an age verification would at least put one obstacle in the way of children being exposed. And now we're part of a global campaign to get other state parties, global governments to agree to uniform laws to protect children from this content. So we've been part of that process. The eSafety Commission here has been charged with coming up with a roadmap, a plan to roll out in 12 to 18 months to protect children from this content. But of course, the global porn industry, very well funded, profit driven, says, no, like they don't care about our children. They don't care about the social compact. They don't care about the fraying of the social bonds. They just care about money, and that's it. And so we're trying to bring them to account at last. And that's also happened with the global campaign against Pornhub, which had over 2 million signatures on a change.org petition. And Pornhub, which is owned by MindGeek, which lives in Canada, has its headquarters in Canada, was brought before the Canadian Parliament's Ethics Committee recently as a result of a global campaign. So finally, the truth is coming out, and this industry is now at last being made accountable.
It sound the process you describe of fighting an industry such as this, and when I ask the next question, saying how do we begin to change something? Because the sub critique that I'm picking up through the example of porn is this pattern that occurs throughout developed democracies, and Australia at probably the center example of, is that it sounds like you're saying that once an industry has a certain amount of money and a certain amount of influence, it's almost as if our democratic systems fail to work. They almost stop working against something like this. So is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to use our government regulatory mechanisms to safeguard certain areas of the population, like children and things like that. Is that roughly when I ask the question, what do we do about it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we need to act personally. We need to act politically. And so personally, we advise, in the family home, have rules around computers, have rules around devices, have every filtering device known to humankind, model respectful behavior in the home. But then it's too much. It takes a village to raise a child. It's too hard for us. We cannot compete on our own with this industry. We need governments, we need regulatory bodies to step up. That's what they're supposed to do, right? Instead, state parties have offloaded their ethical duties to citizens like us to have to immerse ourselves in the most toxic, harmful material possible to immerse yourself in. We stare into the abyss every single day. Why do we do that? Because governments, state parties, state actors, regulatory bodies, so-called, have failed to do it. And yes, that makes us angry because the harm is demonstrable, it's provable. So acting personally, acting collectively, yes, that's a collective action that we have taken to call governments out to stop privileging the commercial porn industry, which has committed social arson on a level never before seen, which has destroyed the cultural scaffolding that once protected children and young people. Yes, we are calling them out now on an international level, saying, we're done. Time's up. You've had too many privileges. You've had too much protection already because you've got money. Money buys power, as we know. But it's done. We're done now, and we're going to bring you to account.
how do you weave the thread of, in this current climate of Me Too, sexual empowerment, the movement of women reclaiming bodily autonomy, and sexual commodification? Because I think it might be, in a way, perfectly summed up in like pop music culture. You know, a year ago, I don't know, I'm pretty out of touch, Cardi B releases the song WAP, right? And it's like the general, and there's different pictures there. There's the general, like, yeah, like men have been rapping about their dicks for ages, time, like she can do what she wants kind of thing. And so they go, okay, good on her for sexual empowerment. But then at the core of it, I mean, it's an industry and it's to make money. And is it commodification of female sexuality to make more money? But is it okay because she's okay with it? How do we weave that line of women empowerment, but sex selling and exploitation and commodification of the female form? How do we navigate that?
Yes. Well, at Collective Shout, we wrote a critique of WAP, and we have argued that this is, empowerment, so-called empowerment, is just used to justify anything. And just because men have rapped about their dicks for eons, women doing the same thing doesn't make it equal. It just means you become like the men. Like, really? Is that what we want? Is that the best we can do? Is to imitate the standards that men have set up? Seriously? We can. When you go onto TikTok and you see little girls gyrating and thrusting their hips and imitating these sexual performances and singing that song, including in kindergartens, as teachers have told me, we have got a problem, because girls are being sold a false idea of empowerment. And that empowerment usually looks like what men want it to look like. Isn't that funny? Isn't that ironic? Oh, men are all for empowerment when it's, tits out for the boys. The Free the Nipple campaign, gosh, the men rallied to that one. You could see them in the parks there supporting the movement to free the nipple. Suddenly they're all feminists, never seen them at anything before, but, they're all there at the slut walk because they said we can pick up some sluts, go lads. So we call out women as well who have clearly adopted these misogynist ideals. Some of us would call it internalized misogyny, for profit. And have a look at the harm you're doing. Stop selling women down the river. We did the same recently with another song that's come out, sadly, called I Am the Strip Club by, I think it's Iggy Azalea. And again, like, can't you offer women and girls something else? Like, isn't there another way to be a woman than saying this is what it looks like? It looked like a porn film. WAP looked like a porn film set to a rap beat. Right? That's the only difference. It had rap music that went with it, but it was a porn script. So we will call it out, wherever we see it. But it is particularly soul destroying when it's women selling out other women for profit and using names like feminist and empowerment and liberation to justify it. It's just totally unacceptable, and it's harmful, and it's certainly not feminist, and it's certainly not empowering. When you see little girls acting like this, and when boys expect girls to act like this.
It's everything you're talking about always seems to have the subtext of the profit motive. It's almost you can't pull what you're talking apart
follow
from
the money. Follow the money trail always.
The consumer capital model that infiltrates everything. Yeah, follow the money. And so, because I suppose the song "I'm an esteemed, strong, independent woman who's a scientist" might not have sold as well as she's, looking through the microscope as a microbiologist learning.
Have we tried? We haven't even tried, right? Give that a go.
With the example you bring up, like Free the Nipple, and the culture of the almost simultaneous pushback that might be purity culture. One that says women are to cover up and they need to, their bodies are sexual things and they need to, don't wear a short skirt because you're inviting something, or that is sexualized. So a girl, just wearing short shorts to play sport in or something might be told, no, you need to wear longer shorts. That's sexualization. But a boy wearing the shortest footy shorts he can never gets that conversation. How do we navigate that conversation of what you're saying it's like free the nipple on one hand, but then on the other hand, you should cover it up because it's a sexual thing and men are allowed to, but women aren't. It sounds like a very tricky, simultaneous narratives that run at the same time that are like very confusing.
Yes. So we don't advocate for purity culture. We see these things as two sides of the one coin, and we certainly don't micromanage girls' behavior. We do the cultural deconstruction with them, then they can make the decisions they want about how they want to act and move and live in the world. And once they join those dots and see how the culture is harming them, they often decide to make their own choices in their own interests. So if a girl is taught from the age of 3 years of age that to be acceptable as a girl, you need to show your body, you need to be on display, you need to be sexually appealing, you need to be sexually attractive, you need to go on Instagram and strut around semi-naked and get lots of men to like you and then to subscribe to you on a private platform, which is literally happening right now. If that's what she is taught is her whole value, why are we surprised when we see these mass conditioned behaviors? And so, it's not saying in fact, it's saying it's quite the opposite. It's saying your body is amazing. You are amazing. You are wonderful and gorgeous and so gifted and so talented and capable of so much. We want to help you reach your full potential, be all that you can be, make a mark on the world, make a difference in the world that goes well beyond you being presented every day as sexually available to any man and boy, who wants you. And we are finding that many girls respond very positively to that. They're grateful to hear that they can be more than some man's masturbatory material, some man that's watching, just show reels of abuse and degradation and violence, then expecting her to act like that. We help. I know the girls tell us that they've seen how harmful the culture is to them. They've seen the false message of empowerment that they've been sold, and they want something better for themselves, for their friends, for their future daughters.
One question I have, is it the gaze of men, like Distorted Linz puts through in the chat, who's saying who runs the music industry? Well, men do. Is it the gaze of men that creates a culture like this? And purity culture has this same tone to it. It's this same controlling and prescription of behavior to fit a predetermined, perhaps religious narrative of what women should be. And then there's the commodification of what women should be. Or is it the gaze of consumer capitalism that men have been programmed most dominantly by? Because it strikes me that the thing you're critiquing is this massive machine that is just a profit-driven. And yes, the CEO of this company is a man. But it always strikes me how powerless that CEO is to make any meaningful change within the company when he is beholden to a set of shareholders that require one thing from him, and that's profit. So if he's to go in and say, hey, Izzy Azalea,